Ladies and gentlemen, we had a very eventful week 2, day 2, with plenty of cool games. I feel like most games are cool because of how best of ones work and how they function. We had BDS vs Astralis as the first one. BDS followed the line of logic with removing Elise, Javan, and also Zaya with the first pick Seju. Naturally, to deny anything that Astralis want to do with the Seju combos, especially on Red's side. Astralis followed up by picking Annie and Zeri, which is a very good look, right? Annie is a champion that they've ignored. Majority of the games that they played so far, and the fact that they are playing the strong meta champions, I think is a very good look. With Caitlyn, Varus, Lulu out, and Zaya too. Zeri prior should be high. And then BDS decide to slam Jinx and Nautilus, and that's perfectly playable into most of the Zeri lanes. Of course, you can send Annie flex, and you can pick counters into Nautilus and enjoy the game like that. We had Lee Sin pick on 3, which is something that can play together with the Annie 2v2 mid, and something that is strong into almost anything. I think when you have Lee Sin jungle, Annie mid is playable into everything. It's like the 2v2 is just so strong, the upfront burst, and you have counterplay into everything. I don't think there's anything that really stands out to me as like a big counter. Maybe you can play like Orianna into it and play distance, but you know, then maybe you're playing like Cleanse Orianna. Maybe in this game Kazuka should have played Cleanse. Nevertheless, Annie and Lee Sin together, I like it, and it's strong. Astralis follow up by banning Olaf and Darius, which I think is natural against the boy wonder. Irelia Akali for 5 bans to just deny any shenanigans from, of course, leader. Probably he doesn't want to play Irelia in such a game. It's like, I think Irelia is kind of a dead ban unless you think that the enemy is going to be able to play it top, which is of course a thing for Finn. Like all in all, like playing Irelia together with Lee Sin, Annie, or the showing, I think it's not so good. So. But it is one of those bans that you just do because, you know, maybe the enemy knows something that you don't, right? They pick Aatrox into Sion, and then Cassiopeia into the Annie flex, and then Leona gets last picked. I thought this game Cassio would run Cleanse, but it's always a question of like, you know, if the enemy can get advantage with TP, maybe the fact that you don't have TP, you get level 3 gank, something happens to you, something disrupts your lane flow. Having no TP there can like ruin your game harder than not having Cleanse. But usually Cassiopeia is gonna run double tenacity legend, and of course unflinching. So at least there's some tenacity in the bank, because obviously Cassio can't buy shoes. In this game, I think that Astralis were in very good conditions. I think that the amount of kills that they managed to find on bottom side was a very positive thing. They were in a very dominant spot. They created soul point advantage. They managed to create circumstances where they were gig ahead on Zeri pretty much, and they were looking like they were just going to end the game, considering the conditions. Sion was giving up a lot in his lane phase. He Sion ulted bot twice, I believe, you know, in trade-off for Aatrox just farming away. And usually in most cases, if you sacrifice top lane for the sake of your AD getting ahead, usually that's something that can be converted and be something that you're satisfied with. But in this game, Seju and Aatrox, they managed actually to deliver. There was a big fight where Aatrox managed to get a quadra kill. He managed to make the fight balanced and even. And the key detail here was the fact that Zeri took a game-deciding fight without LDR. She didn't have LDR in her inventory, and she really needed it because Aatrox was in fact sitting on 200 plus armor, and the same thing for Sejuani. And why it's so important is because together with the upfront damage that you have from Sion ult and the CC from Leona and Annie, it's like your champions kind of run out of gas in the long run against the likes of Cassio and Jinx and Aatrox. If the first initial burst you don't manage to secure any kills and the fights become very extended and Sion ults doesn't get value, Leona ults doesn't get value, Annie ults doesn't get value, dies or something like this, then the champions like Aatrox, Cassio, they definitely, you know, outlast the situation. So this is a case where I think Astralis definitely should have won this game. I think they gave the enemy an opportunity in terms of how they prepared their setups, because all in all they had Hextech Soul. I think at the end of it, Astralis walk away feeling kind of shit about this one, because in the end they managed to create this massive advantage that didn't mean or amount to anything. Special shout out to Adam and Crowny. You know, I think they've been the superstars of BDS, and they really, really delivered in this game. Like the fact that Jinx was 0-3 and she was down CS and much weaker and had the patience to play in a way that opened up for opportunities for Astralis to screw up is a really big deal. And I just want to double check because I remember there was a Nash situation. Let me double check it. Ast versus BDS. I'm just double checking this Nash situation real quick. I remember now. There was like this Nash situation where Astralis wanted to leverage Nash pressure on Hextech Soul, and then it turned out like he ended up stealing it and getting it, and Astralis played a very, very split fight that allowed BDS to like extend the game and get to the point where Crowny could become very useful. That was also like a very, very big blunder from Astralis. But Astralis was super winning. I think if you want to look at it through the lens of Astralis, you know, they were very imprecise in the terms of how they ended the game, which is not like a great thing against the likes of BDS. It's just that this was a very different look in terms of what they drafted, something a lot more standard, and they looked quite competitive. So I think that's, you know, a plus sign. But once again, props to Crowny and, of course, Adam. XL versus Mad Lions. That was a very absurd game in my opinion. XL doing their best Genji impression with the Jace Maokai lock-ins. They banned a lot of the champions that we consider very strong first picks for blue side on blue side. You have Annie out, Rakan out, Gragas out. These are all champions that we've seen first picked on blue side, but they wanted to make sure that they have space to first pick the Jace. Both these teams have had Jace banned against them plenty, so they just didn't want to be in a situation where the enemy trades something for Jace. Like XL's whole plan was to be in a position to first pick Jace. I think Mad Lions were caught off guard by the bans of XL. I think that they had some a ban stolen away from them, so they just dropped an Akali ban there on 3. Jace first pick, and then Lee Sin Zeri with Caitlyn, Draven, and Rakan out. Zeri is natural progression as per usual. Maokai Xayah. I think Xayah is pretty decent together with Jace, even though you have a circumstance where, you know, maybe you think, oh, well, Jace wants to poke, blah, blah. But Xayah kind of turns into like a meat grinder where Jace is going to poke and pressure, and the enemy will be incentivized to pick engaged champions, and then they want to enter the sphere of influence of course, Jace, and then Xayah is going to be able to defend him and create space for him. Lulu's picked on 3, followed by Nautilus Rel bans. And here is like one of those moments where I thought that they're just going to slam Sion on 4, but it ended up not happening. You know, Sion on 4, maybe you invite the Gwen, but I think that's perfectly okay. Just Sion works pretty well against Jace compositions, in my opinion. You can W and eat up the Maokai saplings. You can eat the Maokai ult too. So they went for Jax, followed by Soraka, Sion. Soraka, of course, a very common pick into the Lulu. And then Orianna on 5. I think the key detail about this game is that Mad Lions, when you think of Sion in a nutshell, his biggest window of validity and why he's so strong in the current meta is on Drake 3, on Drake 4, in terms of the pacing of the game. Those fights are always going to happen when nobody has LDR, nobody has any void staffs, no one has any pen. And the big health bar, defended by the fact that he has so much armor and MR, makes him such a menace in the Drake situations. Very easy for him to push a side wave and then collapse with R. And I think that this is why he's really thriving in the current meta game. So if you take that context, right, and you apply it to what Mad Lions have in their composition, the key thing that you want to hope for and what you want to look for is that you want to create ways for Mad Lions to reach 2 core and delay this game to 3 core. XL's composition, very strong on basically on 1 item, on 2 items, where Sion wants to group and Jax wants to leverage his side prio. And then the key thing, the key detail here is that Mad Lions should have enough prio to be able to contest first Drake. They did secure first Drake, but Mad Lions kept creating circumstances that just weren't necessary. A lot of unforced errors that put a lot of gold in the pockets of Xayah, and Excel was put in situations where they ended up being ahead of the curve. And I think that's very important to highlight. I think that in many fights as well, you know, they just found themselves in fights when they were so happy with farming even. I think that when you're playing comps like this, you should be mindful of which drakes you should give up and look to create circumstances where you trade. Because if Jax falls behind, or Orianna's behind of the curve, or you're taking fights when the enemy is on curve and they are on item, I think that you're going to just lose the game very, very fast, and that's exactly what happened. In this game as well, Chasey, he ended up getting ganked, and he was killed on side. And Jax never found himself, Jax found himself in grouped situations at 12-minute mark where he, of course, doesn't even have Divine Sunder finished, you know? It's like Chasey put himself in a position where he's playing a game that you really don't want to play with Jax. And he, if this was your intention, why don't you just play Ornn, you know? So I think it's very important that when you pick Jax, that you have the ability to cover his highlighted strengths and to cover his weakness, you know, because usually Jax, his strongest point is when he gets advantages and he can put himself in isolated 1v1s with Divine Sunder against Sion, and then he leverages that to farm more, to take camps, and then he becomes super strong, and then he just generates more gold through platings and through having prio, and then Sion limps into fights and Jax is already in position, and this is what you have to do. If Jax is just grouping to match Sion and you're fighting on Drake 3 and 4, then he's going to look super useless as he did in this game. All things around, I think there were moments where they were playing around Karzi and his ultimate, and then it ran out, and then you had Chasey Q in. It just, Mad Lions look very uncoordinated, and I think that their draft definitely required a lot more finesse to play, and today they lacked a lot of finesse. On first glance, I thought that the red side is going to look super good, so I thought that Jax is going to be able to carry, but I think the execution is definitely a lot harder, and I think that in the end, if all of the fights are happening and the game is determined between 15 and 25-minute mark, this is where blue side's composition is going to be super good, because you need penetration, you need grievous wounds, you need to itemize for, you want to buy armor because the enemy is 80 heavy, like items are going to be so good with time. But in the mid game, this composition is insanely strong, and of course you're going to be strong in the late game too, if of course you are snowballing, right, naturally. There was this big blunder that eventually led to a Nashor, where Niski was trying to go through mid and he died, and then afterwards, I think smooth sailing for Excel. They managed to win, and they were just sieging in their comp. They managed to get Chemtech Soul. This was one of the rare occasions where Chemtech Soul and Chemtech Drakes actually give you so much value. It's like Soraka had 3 Chemtech Dragons, which is funny to see. Super funny to see, right? We continue on. We had game number 3, Team Heretics vs Fnatic. I think, starting from drafts, I was surprised. First, on blue side, you have a situation where Vi is given up, no prio on Aurelion Sol. It wasn't picked on 3. They first pick Zeri because Rakan is out of the picture. Understandable. They lock in Xayah Vi. Alright, they have the Vi into Zeri. I think that you should consider here, after Fnatic's performance on Caitlyn, the whole world kind of assumed that Fnatic is never going to play Caitlyn again. So I feel like Team Heretics kind of got into their own head. Maybe it's something that they know about their scrim practice results. Maybe they scrimmed against Fnatic. They just scrimmed against Fnatic. They saw their Kate, and it's something they want to remove from the picture. But I think probably you want to ban Vi instead. And then you can look to pick the Zeri. They slammed the Jarvan, which is of course a Jankos classic, the Jarvan. Jarvan, he's always been good on Jarvan. It's not super great into Vi and Xayah, I'd say, but it's like okay, right? It's like if Xayah ults, she's still stuck in the cage. That's like room for counterplay. That's perfectly fine. You know, I think that's okay. I don't think Java necessarily has an issue here. I think it's okay. And they follow by Lulu, Nautilus on 3. So Fnatic have some buttons already, and they have a lot of ways to already cut the distance and to pressure Zeri in fights, because they have the tools to actually deny his mobility, right? You need to have on-click CC, and Nautilus Vi is already that, right? Fnatic ban Kragas Victor for 5, and I was so surprised the team Heretics let Taliyah go through. I think it was very greedy from Fnatic to pick Nautilus on 3. I think here, I think it's better to actually pick either Taliyah on 3 or Aurelion Sol on 3 if that's what you want to do, because Aurelion Sol is something that Humanoid is very good at, and I think that they would highlight his strengths and cover some of the weaknesses of Fnatic. But they go 4-5 and they get Taliyah. Taliyah Vi is a combo that we all know about. Sure, they can play maybe Vi Ari, but I do believe that it's considerably worse. Sure, in this position, maybe Ari is better against Javan. That's something you can consider. But all in all, I think just leaving Taliyah open is a very strange decision. They blind pick Jax with Gragas out, and the response is Team Heretics. They go Azir and Sion, so they just go a very standard front-to-back composition. That's completely okay, and that's completely fine. Taliyah is picked on 5. So I think the main issue here for Team Heretics in terms of draft is that, you know, if I think about the 2v2 mid, I think that Azir should be able to pressure early, Javan should be stronger early. I think the main thing is just that later, in terms of how streamlined a lot of the Fnatic fights will be, in terms of how they choose their opponents and like their targets, I mean, not opponents, but targets. The Vi Nautilus Taliyah combo is just very strong. So this is a very tricky game for Zeri to maneuver. Stoppage is going to be super important. Zhonya's was even completed for Jack Spectre, which I think it makes sense in this game, because I think BT won't make him survive. This game was a doozy. So you have Sion split mapping with his jungler. So young Javan was super far ahead. He took all 3 bot side camps, and Vi completely sacked himself to be bottom to defend. So he was defending the bottom dive, and he made sure that Jax doesn't need to TP. And then the top wave bounced, and then Jax decided to push it into Sion to then give back to Vi. And this is where things got dirty super quick. There was a big fight in River that Team Heretics didn't need to take. I have been praising Yanko's all split long, but this was a moment where it was very questionable what was happening in the game. This is one of those moments where you just give up the crap because Jax sacked his advantage. Not sacked his advantage, but he pushed into Sion to make sure that he's available there. In a case where, you know, Jax is on a slow push and Sion is slow pushing and they're playing for the Sion gank, then Javan can step into River and maybe it plays out different. But this was a clear case of Jax crashing the top wave, and then the whole game blew up, right? This game was heavily stalled by the fact that Team Heretics managed to find the lane swap, they managed to find the Herald, and Zeri actually generated a lot of gold, which I think was super huge. They managed to put Sion in a situation where he's isolated and there was a map split, and Jax had the Divine Sunder advantage that they couldn't really leverage that. I think in most cases what Fnatic wanted to create was Jax into Sion, Vi and Taliyah, Xayah, Nautilus play together in a unit and they pressure on the other side of the map. But instead we have this map trade where Zeri was very happy to get a lot of platings and a lot of gold generated. This game across the board was quite dirty, and it's very hard to describe in words. I think the majority of it later was, I think Advien misplayed a lot of fights. He queued in on a Sion when it wasn't necessary. I think it's very important, you know, a lesson here is that, like, if your Taliyah and Xayah are hitting, then you don't need to actively do anything. They're already DPSing, you can keep your spells and all is good. It kind of created circumstances where you traded 1-for-1 where it wasn't necessary. I think this was a very hard game for Jack Spectre to carry and maneuver himself in. He did his absolute best. He had the good stopwatch moments, good flash moments, and I think it was pretty decent what I saw. This game was way sweatier than it needed to be because Fnatic had a very big advantage, and they gave away some kills here and there when it wasn't the right way. I remember there was also like a big moment where I'm at a loss for words to how to describe this. I think if I want to summarize it, I think Jack Spectre played well. I think that Humanoid played really fucking well. I think he was always in good position and was getting a lot of things done in the fights. And then I have to, of course, highlight that Evie, he just doesn't understand his role as the Scion. Like, he was just contesting, and you can make a montage of each one of his death, and you can't really justify a lot of the things that he is doing. This is a very tough look, because in the end, Scion should be the epitome of easy to play and finding value as a top laner, but he was usually he's a liability, but this was like very bad, very harsh, insanely bad in fact. Jack Spectre did his absolute best to carry, and I'm happy to see Jack Spectre is finding, new heights of confidence. But he gets a stamp of disapproval. We can move on to the next game. SK versus Koi. I think this was a good display of Koi. I think Koi played a very decent game. I'm just gonna pull up a clip real quick to remind myself. Sorry. We had I think this game, it was more balanced out than even because of the SK double kill on bottom side. I think this was a moment where Comp could have flashed and maybe it would have been a lot more dangerous. Koi put a target on Certus' back and they kept trying to kill him, and in a lot of cases it worked. This game became a lot closer because Trimby was eating hooks and he was kind of giving something back to SK when they were trying to pressure. But all in all, I like how cohesive SK was playing. How cohesive Koi was playing. I could easily follow a line of logic in their decision, and it seemed like everyone was kind of aligned on what they needed to happen. SK had one of those clever plays with the Nasher, but then eventually it led to a situation where they overreached and they pretty much snacked on our own side, but it ended up creating a circumstance where they overstayed and they ended up getting killed. And then Certus had one of the worst TPs we've seen, all split long. Those didn't cancel a Lee Sin Q and got killed while they had the Nasher, and this created a big tempo swing. And the main thing about Koi's the draft, if we want to focus on that for a moment, is just the first pick Xayah, right? Varus, Sejuani, Caitlyn out, Zeri, Annie, and Vi out. First pick Xayah, pick Rakan, Lee Sin, enemy picks Thresh, Wukong. I think Thresh, very hard to finish games with. It's very hard to play a game and be more useful than Rakan, especially if you're not going to have an AD that is designed to really, really hard pressure lane. They pick Kai'Sa on 3 and they follow up with Gnar after Sylas Jackspan. Really like the Gnar pick away to remove it from SK's pool, and I think that just Gnar is something that like of course Shigenda and Irrelevant have played super well. Sion and Azir gets locked in, and usually with Lissandra I would be like worried to play into Azir. I think he could have probably changed his itemization. Jizuki talked about it. He said that he would prefer a Ludens into Shadowflame because nobody's going to buy MR. He went for Road of Ages, something a little bit more safer, tankier, easier to lane with. But you know, this whole game plan will revolve now around the Azir summoner choices. If he goes cleanse, you want to pressure him with jungle early to disrupt him, or if he goes TP, you just want to make sure after 6 that you find opportunities to one-shot him. And then through Rakan, Lissandra, and Lee, you want to take over 3v3 mid and then hover into bot side. You know, this is like the ultimate RNG comp, right? The way RNG always played their macro was that Kaiser's on mid, catching neutral mid waves that the enemy pushed in. And during that time, Lissandra and Rakan and Lee are going to take over river, already contest side, and to trap the enemy that is going to face check to them. And the beauty of why you can do this and why you can isolate Kaiser is because she can join a fight from any angle. She can flank, she is going to ult when the CC comes, so you just need to make sure that you have CC, and they have plenty of it. And this is something that SK had a very hard time dealing with. Nar is pushing on side, of course Sion needs to catch, and when Sion needs to catch, they created circumstances where the enemy face checks into you, and this is something that Koi played super well. This is like the most classic RNG comp ever. And this was very well executed. I have to say, the last 2 Koi games have looked very good for them, and I really like the TF, I really like the Lissandra. Larsen is showing, you know, what he's capable of. I think that Comp is also playing super well, and Shigenda is really finding his comfort. I think there's room for improvement for Malrang and Trimby because they've set a higher standard for themselves based on their past play. But all in all, a very good look for Koi. In terms of SK, I think this was one, like after a very successful week 1, Certus looked very, very bad in this game. I think he made a lot of mistakes that were tough to forget, very tough to forget. Another one of those questions is that, you know, I think Markoon did a good job of you know, playing the Wukong, getting himself ahead, and getting to the Divine Sunderer point. Just that I think that SK, they seem to be a lot more successful in cases where they have stronger early game to contest. But I think it's important that SK find ways to play it both ways. The game ended in the end was the situation where Nar was hooked on mid. I was surprised that Certus didn't take Lantern to eat in, and he was, you know, going for Comp with the flash. Comp flashed his R, and then Azir was in a shit position, and that created a circumstance where Koi just got a very free fight around mid, and I think that SK was kind of too overeager to create this fight. I think they could have just played time and played around objectives. In the end, Koi managed to take a Nash and then convert it into a win. I think if SK was a little bit more careful about how they took fights and how they were aware of enemies, I think this game could have been a lot more competitive. SK will have to regroup coming into tomorrow. Finally, the creme de crop. Is that something you say? Creme de crop? G2 versus Vitality. We saw from the draft Jace, blue side ban, Caitlyn, Annie. Very common bans. Like Jace is something we see often. Jace flex on red is tough to deal with. Fortnite, one of the best Jace games. Very straightforward, you know. The Koreans that play Jace, you know, they seem to be very dangerous with it. You know, don't let them have it, for sure. Draven, Rakan, Varus out, and first pick Xayah. Kind of surprising to see the first pick Xayah here, but I think what kind of first pick Xayah gives you is that it gives you a decent AD, and it hides kind of your hand, and it allows you to counter support, allows you to also secure Vi in theory, because the enemy doesn't want to big Vi into Xayah. And you know that Xayah, Zeri are going to be the highest prio AD carries when Draven, Varus, and Caitlyn are out. So Gragas Zeri, I think, is a very strong rotation. I think Gragas is one of the better champions into Xayah already. Zeri can play on distance, play on move speed, and then Vi Soraka gets locked in. Here in a situation where you don't see enemy super, I was surprised to see the Soraka lock in, but Vitality just didn't give a shit and they locked Lulu anyway. I was kind of saying on broadcast, you know, is this a situation where they're going to send Soraka solo lane? Is that their move? It ended up didn't happen. It didn't happen. I'm curious to see if you know, Vitality would have changed their support pick if anything would have played out different. Oh, sorry for the yawn. Oh. Vitality ban Silas Talia, and then G2 do the classic Jax Fiora ban, signaling to the whole world that they are planning to blind pick Kled again. Aurelion Sol gets picked, and then Cassiopeia as is the answer, and then Camille on 5. So, in regards to draft, I think that G2 need to find ways to leverage the fact that Cassio is stronger early towards early objectives and so forth, and then when it comes to fights, they need to be very, very explosive and find ways to flank and to CC and shut down the same target. Leverage the Kled ultimate move speed in order to get in close quarters, and definitely, you know, go all in. They need to break the sphere of influence of the enemy, which is something that is inherently very hard, right? I think on paper, if Vitality are even or ahead, entering the sphere of influence of Aurelion Sol, Gragas and Zeri and Lulu is very difficult, and that's something that we saw glimpses of, but I have to say that Vitality misplayed a lot of circumstances, and G2 were very quick to punish. In this game, two things that were very concerning was BB's performance. I think that the Flash Ignite, the whole Kled blind pick thing, sent it into topside. I don't know, I'm not such a strong believer. Camille had turbo conditions in this game, and Photon had a wonderful game. And then on the flip side, Vitality, I felt like Bo completely lost his mind in a lot of cases where he ease forward, doesn't play with the correct pacing of what is happening on the screen. He's getting caught a lot in fights and made favorable situations for Vitality unfavorable because he accelerated the speed of fights for no reason, giving the enemy targets to hit. You can see on blue side, right, they have Xayah, Cassio. You don't want to be in their sphere of influence, and you want them to pay a price to enter your sphere of influence when you're the team with the Aurelion Sol and the Gragas. Just place your barrel down, put your E down as Aurelion Sol, and make the enemy bleed for even interacting with you. They need to enter your sphere of influence, and you need to really, really pressure that and do that well. But instead, we had moments where Gragas is Eing in, and that's just really, really not the way. Vitality managed to secure the first Drake. Camille conditions were super, super good. Gragas got Rift Herald too. I think a very, very big and important turnaround was the catch on upset in the mid-wave. I think the catch on the mid-wave against upset was so big because in terms of the gold and how they aligned coming into that fourth Drake fight, somehow the Kled, who is 60 CS behind, is matched in items against the Camille. Xayah is matched on items with the Zeri. And finally, Cassio has Archangel. So this was a very, very big moment in the game for G2's composition and how their economy was working out. And this was the moment where Bo just eased into the enemy, you know, he just eased into the enemy, and just lost it. I think the best way is if tenki just shows it on the screen now. You see this Aurelion Sol E blocking out the river completely, and you just have to play on the Aurelion Sol E cooldown. You have to put your barrel down as Dragoon and just take it easy. And instead we have this E in, and the circumstances created where Gragas is one shot, and then all of a sudden, you know, G2 can posture forward and they can commit all the way to the fight. You need to kite together. Instead, Gragas gave the enemy a point of entry. And then there was the circumstance where Vitality felt the need to get more out of the fight. They chased. Photon kind of made mistakes. A mistake on which how he places E on the wall. He was in the miasma. They killed Aurelion Sol. They killed Camille. And G2 managed to secure Nash. It's always the case when you secure Nash that it becomes easy to, enforce your composition. But Aurelion Sol is kind of hilarious in the way that he can just eat the wave and make it not be able to move to gather more stacks. That's just hilarious. That's something that you can do. It's too funny to me. It was an unfortunate circumstance. They caught Camille on side. Camille, they killed Cassio on side. Camille was the follow-up death, and once again coming into what I believe was the fifth Drake of the game. At the fifth Drake of the game, Bo just spread out and isolated himself from the team. Ended up dying when he could have just stayed grouped. And then finally, the nail in the coffin was the situation where Photon is trading tier 2 top for tier 2 mid. And tier 2 top for tier 2 bot, sorry. And then the follow-up was, Vitality was just posturing forward to try to, cancel some recalls for the enemy, but he ended up getting engaged on, and the silence as a follow-up, works very similar to Caitlyn traps the silence on the stopwatch. And the enemy just, died, and G2 managed to find an end. I think G2 played super well macro-wise. I think Yike had a very solid game, Hansama too. Very disciplined game, and I think they punished all of the mistakes that Vitality did. Still same concerns as always, Vitality, I think in terms of how Bo played the later stages of the game and how they played around their abilities, I think that's something that Vitality needs to improve on, but it's good to see Vitality getting tested in the later parts of the game, because we only saw them dominate the early games and, go into mid-game with super big leads. This was a concern of mine when it came to Vitality, and it's good that this gets highlighted now in the season rather than later. This is something that they need to address and work on. But G2 played just a smarter, more elegant game in the later parts, and I think this is something that, we didn't learn anything new. Rather, we confirmed suspicions about these teams. Broken Blade, evidently, in terms of how they draft and approach it. And every game, I feel like BB is in losing positions, and then somehow he bails himself out, which I think is a strength of BB, but also a strength of G2, that they can funnel back resources into him, and they can make him come back into the game. But Bo as well, this was a negative Bo game, it's like Bo did this level 3 gank on bottom side, and then Vi was ahead, and some of the barrels didn't land the way they're supposed to, and a lot of the E's forward were not that great. I think he could have, I think the story of the day, Wunder kind of put it nicely into words, is a lot of players need to recognize that the biggest mistake of the day was players not recognizing when they need to do less, when their teammates are capable of doing more. I think that's true for every game today. We follow up with, of course, the matchups of tomorrow. I'm losing my voice slowly. Always doing this recap so late at night. SK versus XL. I think SK should be favored, but XL, they've been they are growing. They've shown some clever drafts, and they've shown some cohesion. I think XL, are picking up some steam, but I think SK should be favored. Mad versus Team Heretics. I believe, Mad Lions isn't looking super hot right now. I think today was a very terrible showing. I think Mad Lions, I think Hilly had a very poor game. I think Ilioya had a very poor game, and I think that there was no activity that was accurate around the 3v3 mid, and I think that Mad Lions kind of need to take a step back and see what's up. JC wasn't really connected with the game, and there was no advantage to be had. And Mad Lions, played very poorly today. I have to call it how it was. Hilly, I think, played fine in lane. I think that, had a nice polymorph on Jace once. He had a good flash bait on Maokai, and based off of what I saw on the screen. But I think in a lot of cases he also pushes forward too far and doesn't play around. I think that Mad Lions felt very caged in their draft because they didn't have a lot of tools to pressure forward. So they were kind of stuck playing Excel's game, and they needed to be patient. And I don't associate Mad Lions with patience. But Team Heretics, this is a team that they should beat. Vitality versus Astralis. I would say Vitality is favored. I think Astralis, still, I think in terms of who they are as a team, I think they showed, even though they lost today, they showed a different side of themselves, which I think is good. I think Vitality just still have the stronger individual players, and I think the main question will be if they will be dragged into like a 3v3 skirmish heavy game around mid, how they'll react to Astralis offering that and playing that. Will they react appropriately? Will they be able to contest it? Or will they just find the right bands to put Astralis out of their comfort zone? BDS versus G2. I think G2 is favored. I don't think we need to add so much more there. I think still Crowny, Labrov, and Adon machines played super good. If there's a point of entry, I think it's just Adam against Broken Blades. But I think the bot lane is very competitive too. It's just when it comes to the macro department, I think G2 can be very, very punishing if you leave openings. So that's going to be interesting. Fnatic versus Koi is a big one. I think that at the beginning of this week we didn't have high hopes for Koi, but Fnatic took a win today. I think Koi should be favored coming into this one, and I think that if you put yourself in a circumstance in terms of what you want to target ban against Fnatic, I think you just make sure that they don't get Rakan. You can ban Xayah, you can ban Varus, and I think that Koi will have a good time. Nothing really stands out to me as champions that Fnatic have really big teeth on. I think today they lost. I mean, they won the game because of a very overblown circumstance and the inability for Evie to take a chill pill. Today should have been an easy game based over the condition, and I think they managed to steal a lot of champions in draft with the Nautilus on 3 and then getting Talia for 5 somehow. And I don't think that's going to repeat itself. It's always, when you are on paper one of the weakest teams in the regions, all of the things that happen around you are so important. I think in terms of the results, Fnatic should be very unhappy with the fact that XL won a game against a team that on paper should be above them in the standings. So Fnatic, Team Heretics in that context need to look at Mad Lions as a team that they need to beat. All of the teams above them have 2 wins already, and they have some easier matchups coming their way. And another layer of it, Fnatic is not going to face XL again. Team Heretics beat XL, and there is potential for maybe a 3-way tie if it goes full circle, because Fnatic beat Team Heretics. Team Heretics beat XL, and XL beat Fnatic. There could be a very crazy circumstance where we have a 3-way tie, teams battling it out for that final 8th place in order to qualify to playoffs. So we will see how that pans out. All in all, I'm excited for tomorrow. If you sneezed during this video, bless you and bless your face. I'll catch you on the flippity flop.